CMBA President Matt Besser, and it's my honor to welcome you all to today's International Women's Day program hosted by the Cleveland Metropolitan Bar Association. As an organization committed to justice, professional excellence, and equity and inclusion, the CMBA is proud to amplify the voices of women leaders and advocates who drive meaningful change every day. The contributions of women in law, business, and government have shaped the history of Northeast Ohio and continue to define our future. But while today is a day to celebrate how far our legal profession has come in the march toward full equity and inclusion, it's also a time to reflect on the work that remains, to acknowledge that there is much more to do. And to get there is going to require our collective effort to foster an environment where all legal professionals have a true opportunity to succeed, to lead, and to thrive. So as we gather for International Women's Day, let's make today a day for both celebration and action. I'd like to thank our devoted panelists, sponsors, and event organizers for their hard work in putting together this impactful program. And with that, let's get started. Thank you all for being here, and happy International Women's Day.
Thank you, President Matt Besser, for kicking us off this afternoon. Hi, everyone. I'm Lisa Black, the General Counsel of Catholic Charities and a member of the Cleveland Metropolitan Bar Association's Chief Legal Officers Committee, a sponsor of the CMBA's International Women's Day festivities. We'd like to take this time to invite women Chief Legal Officers of Cleveland to join our collegial group as we continue to meet throughout the year for programming and events tailored to those in our in-house roles. It is my privilege to welcome you to today's CLE program in celebration of International Women's Day. We are proud to sponsor this event as part of our ongoing commitment to advancing women within the legal profession. While we celebrate the many achievements of women in law, we must also recognize the persistent challenges and barriers that women continue to face in legal workplaces across Ohio. Today's panel discussion will shed light on these realities, examining the structural and cultural obstacles that hinder progress and exploring ways to foster meaningful change. As legal professionals, we have the opportunity to challenge these barriers and build a profession where all lawyers have the support, respect, and opportunities they deserve. We hope this session sparks thoughtful dialogue and inspires each of us to be active participants in creating a more equitable legal community. Now, it is my pleasure to turn it over to our distinguished panelists, Bethany Studenic, Kelley Brauer, Anne-Marie Ahern, and Kelley Barnett. We look forward to an insightful and engaging discussion.
Thank you for joining us today, celebrating International Women's Day. Our presentation today is called Raising the Bar, Bias, Awareness, and Resources. My name is Kelley Brauer, and I'm a partner at Employment Law Partners, an employee-side labor and employment firm. I'm also the treasurer of the Ohio Women's Bar Association. It's one of the organizations that's sponsoring the CMBA's International Women's Day events and the CLE today. And I'm also moderating today's program. Before I introduce our fabulous panel, if you couldn't join us last time, I just wanted to give a brief overview about Raising the Bar initiative. The Raising the Bar initiative is sponsored by the Cleveland Metropolitan Bar Association, Women Law Section, and the Ohio Women's Bar Association, and along with Enlightened Solutions, which is an organization that was co-founded by our panelists today, Bethany Studenic. Our mission is to create a safe and confidential space for women in the legal profession in Ohio who experience gender bias, discrimination, or harassment to privately discuss their experiences, seek advice, and/or take action. The genesis or idea for this initiative was kickstarted by attorney Kelley Barnett, who's on our panel today, and also Professor Jennifer Kupar with the Case Western Reserve School of Law. And with that, I want to introduce our panel. Again, we have Bethany Studenic, who is not only the co-founder for Enlightened Solutions, but is also of counsel for the law firm of Sobel, Wade, and Mapley, which is also an employee-side labor and employment firm. We also have Anne-Marie Ahern, who's the co-managing principal at the law firm of McCarthy, Lebit, and also practices employee-side labor and employment law. And then lastly, we have Kelley Barnett, who is the Senior Vice President and Senior Managing Counsel for AmTrust Financial. And we are going to start with Bethany Studenic, who created a survey that was distributed by the CMBA and the Ohio Women's Bar Association that some of you may have completed to learn about women's experiences in the legal profession. And Bethany collected that data and interpreted the survey results that she'll be discussing today. So with that, I will turn it to Bethany.
Thanks, Cammie. Very excited to be here today. So we're going to go through a couple of slides to talk about what the findings were, and then we're so excited to get into some of the discussion around this. So we're going to start out. I won't introduce myself again. We just had a lovely introduction from Cammie, but my name is Bethany Studenic. I've been doing this work for quite some time, and so I do a lot of work around civil rights, has been kind of the through line in my career. So in this conversation, I want to root us in the concept that making better workplaces for any group makes better workplaces for everyone. What I mean by that, it's this concept of targeted universalism. It means setting shared goals for everyone while making specific adjustments to help those who face unique challenges. Basically, it boils down to when women thrive, we all thrive. To talk a little bit about the methodology of the survey, we utilized a survey type called phenomenological research. And basically, this is a fancy data science word for looking at the lived experience of a particular group. And we paired that with both qualitative and quantitative metrics. I find this very impactful in our work because whenever you're talking about data, it can be very easy to kind of lose the story and the impact behind those statistics. And so it's important to pair not only the quantitative metrics, but the stories behind and the impact behind each of those metrics. To tell you a little bit about who took the survey, we had 115 responses from women attorneys all across Ohio. Our respondents ranged in age from 26 to over 61. We had respondents that had about a decade of experience, but of course we had folks with less and more experience. And most respondents work in firms with over 100 attorneys, followed by a tie between smaller firms and in-house counsel roles, although we had a sprinkling of a lot of different roles and representation. Our respondents are 87% white, 12% black, 4% Hispanic, 3% Asian, and you can see the population here compared with ABA data. And that's just important to understand to know what voices may be missing and who's represented in the survey data we're going over today. A lot of this focus is on microaggressions, and microaggressions are important to understand because they are one of the main driving factors that are moving women out of this profession or moving them into different careers. It can be one of the biggest barriers that women face. And it's a broad array of different exclusionary behaviors and tactics, and we'll go over some of them today. Part of the basis of this research is to understand what are some of those tactics and behaviors that are creating these outcomes that we're seeing that really result in inequalities for women in the legal profession. Here's a few. Being interrupted or spoken over, the expectation of non-attorney labor, so assuming that women attorneys are going to be the one to take notes or make coffee or set up the birthday parties for everybody in the office, being talked down to or condescended to, being paid less, the male counterparts, mistaken for non-attorney staff. The list kind of goes on, and I do encourage you to read the full report. I believe there's a link available so you can get into each of the percentages here. And there's even more, right? We measured a lot of different behaviors, and we created these behaviors based on conversations with women attorneys. These are some of the things that they talked about when they talked about the challenges that they're facing in their careers. And you'll see towards the end, we even have some that are very egregious, right? So we have things that are, difficult to deal with, and they might be things that you kind of navigate in the moment. And then there are things that are really, really concerning behavior. So we have things like unwelcome physicality. We have derogatory names. And so those things, sometimes I talk to folks and they think maybe we've moved on from that as a profession, but I want to be clear that those things are still happening in our local law firms. The most common top 5 microaggressions, 98% experience being interrupted or spoken over, 96% experience being talked down to or condescended to, 90% knew that they were paid less than coworkers. And that's always an interesting one to me because this statistic indicates that they know, right, that they're being paid less. So we assume that the statistic could be higher for women who don't know the salary of their peers. 92% were mistaken for other staff like court reporters, receptionists, etc. And 93% had the experience of being expected to give non-attorney labor, going above and beyond their actual job. 86% talked about family and caregiving. And this is an interesting one because this was from open-ended responses. So participants brought this up as an issue whenever we asked them about their experiences. Family and caregiving was the number one thing that came up. And we have a couple of stories here, having to work harder than male counterparts to build up goodwill, to last me through maternity leaves without being looked over by others. This is a huge challenge for women attorneys in this region. And I'd like to make the point, bringing it back to targeted universalism, men struggle with this too. A recent Pew survey found that 6 in 10 men also feel that they don't spend enough time with their children. If we're able to address this for women, we're also able to address this for men. This is a unified goal, but we do also acknowledge that women are disproportionately dealing with this burden. And so it's important that we focus on building better and more inclusive spaces for women at work. 90% of our respondents have been paid less than similarly situated male attorneys. The quote here, making less money than my male counterparts for equal or superior work. Often the bar is really high for women as well. So not only are we dealing with additional work, we have to give higher quality work, and then we're being paid less for it. So it can be very, very grueling for female attorneys in this field. One thing I want to point out about this too is that every time that we underpay a woman, we devalue our whole profession. This is a well-documented phenomenon. It's something that happens as women take over or go into male-dominated fields. We watch salaries go down for everyone across the board because every time you underpay a woman, you're undermining that ability for negotiation. You're driving down the average salary for everybody. I know we all want to be able to bill at good rates, and so every time that we're devaluing a woman, we're devaluing the profession. Often, people ask, why don't women just report these things? Well, 60% of respondents had never reported these issues, and there's a lot of very, very good reasons why women don't report. Here's some stories talking about this. I sensed that there would be repercussions if I reported it. A senior female colleague advised me against rocking the boat, cautioning that it could hinder my advancement, and I took her advice to heart. There are a lot of reasons. Women are concerned about how they might be treated. They're concerned about retaliation. They want to be able to continue in their roles. What we found is that women who report mistreatment at work receive little support and face danger in their own careers. The important point here, respondents were more likely to experience retaliation than to see their harasser reprimanded or terminated. That is why women are not reporting. If you're someone who is in charge of or able to have influence on the reporting process here, the proper response is to address those complaints, not to target the woman who reported. They inquired about what I wanted them to do, shifting the responsibility onto the woman instead of taking care of it themselves, right? She needed help and support in that moment. She was brave in bringing it up, and then she felt like she was being tasked with fixing everything as well. That's a very, very impossible situation to be in. We asked participants, which services, if offered, would you be interested in? The top was mentorship programs. The second was policy, research, or recommendations. As lawyers, I know we go to policy pretty quickly as a point that we want to see. A women in law complaints line or support system, healing supports and discussions, and assistance with filing formal complaints. And I think it's telling that assistance filing formal complaints is the least interesting to this group. Mentorship is key, plus the ability to be honest without fear of retaliation. I could use mentorship. It would help to have discussions with older, well-established women to discuss current challenges and seek advice. And for me, that has been the most impactful thing, having women that I can talk to. So really excited to have this discussion today. Last bit that I'll leave you with, targeted universalism. Again, more inclusive workplaces benefit everybody. Competition. Diverse workforces fare better in a volatile market. There's a whole body of research. I have whole presentations on just this point. There's so much to back that up. And lastly, the future is diverse. The workforce is rapidly diversified. Gen Z, I know we think that they're all still babies, but they're actually in their 20s now. They're starting to come in to the workforce, and they are 48% racially and ethnically diverse. Women are more educated in that generation than we have ever seen. They're 33% LGBTQ. And so again, I just drive home the point that building those inclusive workplaces are going to be really important for attracting and retaining the future of talent here.
Okay. Thank you, Bethany. So the last time we had this discussion, we were talking about your results. We were talking about these findings from the perspective of a male managing partner and also a female government attorney. So now for today, we have perspectives of female in-house counsel and also a female managing partner. And I want to talk first to Anne Marie about the term that was in Bethany's slides about microaggressions. And kind of what do you think about that term, and especially in today's context where there's the attack on DEI initiatives and things like that?
Certainly. Bethany, that was amazing. Thank you for sharing your insights. You know, it's interesting because I am not only a managing partner, but I'm a person who I think falls into that category of older, well-established female lawyers, and I've also been an advocate for women in the workplace throughout my entire career as a litigator in employment law. So I've got, this is so, the intersectionality of what we're talking about here for me is interesting, and there's sometimes some tension between your role as a manager, your role as an advocate, your role as an advisor, and your own lived experience. But when I look at this topic of microaggressions, and I looked at the broad category of conduct that you described as a microaggression, I actually question whether that is a label that we should be using as often as it's sometimes used, because I think that we have to view where we are in this conversation and our progress against the current backdrop, where DEI is undeniably under attack, where women who are in a position of influence and leadership are sometimes automatically assumed to have been placed there because they are a DEI hire. And so to me, that term microaggressions, although I don't doubt that all of that happens, those are independently injurious events that thwart progress and equality. I think that it's also a term that can be a dog whistle for people who are looking to describe these efforts towards equality and diversity as something that is unneeded, unnecessary, provides preferential treatment. So I think that we have to be really discerning about the conduct that we're describing and really take each of those issues as they arise. And, you know, for instance, a difference in pay is a entirely different. It is an independent adverse employment action versus someone who says, "Oh, can you take notes in this meeting?" Offensive as that may be, these are vastly different situations that I think warrant their own discussions.
Okay. And Kelley, what do you think about, again, that term microaggressions, and what have you seen in your experience?
Well, I think the data is important. The data that Bethany shared is important, and I think the context and why we see these microaggressions is very important. I think it's equally important, though, to equip women with the tools and strategies so that they, if they choose, and I'll talk about that in a minute, if they choose to address the microaggression, for example, in the moment, that they know how to do it. But I want to lead that conversation off by saying, even though we're talking about things that happen in the professional workplace, I think making the decision to address a situation, whether as an ally or your own personal situation, is a very deeply personal decision. You may choose not to address it. There's nothing wrong with that. You may choose to address it. That's okay too. But what I don't like hearing, and building on the slide that you shared earlier, Bethany, about reporting, is that the right decision for you is the decision you make. Okay, and I want to emphasize that. I think what I thought I would do is just give a couple of examples of how I've addressed a few situations that have happened to me. Some perhaps are described as microaggressions. I think things like family leave, I would describe those as macroaggressions. Okay, but one thing that I encountered a lot, and I did just a few days ago, is what I would call terms of endearment. For example, I was in a high stakes mediation earlier this week, and this more experienced lawyer from a southern state kept referring to me as honey repeatedly. I was in this mediation with my executive client, several people in the room. He kept referring to me by using that word. And I chose in the moment to decide I'm going to address that with him privately. And what I did was, on a break, I called him aside and said, "Hey, Bill, can I talk to you for a minute?" That's not his real name, by the way. "Can I talk to you for a minute?
To protect
No,
the
I don't
innocent."
think you intended to offend me, but you did. And again, I don't think you intended to, but from here on out, can you just call me Kelley or Counsel or Ms. Barnett? Just don't call me honey." And he was very sorry. He was very apologetic. I think he didn't mean to offend me. He did. It was important to me, and this was my strategy. It was important to me to call it out. But what I'm also always struggling with is balancing what you might have heard about as the likability bias. And so as women, there's a stereotype that we are supposed to be nice and, go along to get along. And I'm always trying to think about that bias. Unfair as it might be, it's there and it exists. So I'm always trying to think about it when I'm figuring out how to address a particular thing. Whether to address it, and if so, how to address it. And so in that moment, I chose sort of a private approach, a conversation. I didn't see the need to embarrass him. There have been other situations where in the moment it was something I needed to address. Years ago when I was in court, an opposing counsel commented on my body. And in that moment, for me, what felt right was to shut it down and say, you can't say that to me. Don't say that to me. I was professional and I was calm. I never see a need to raise my voice in those moments. But that was how I addressed it.
How did your opposing counsel react when you said that?
Startled. He was startled. I was
Okay.
calm. I mean, again, I don't think berating somebody or yelling is productive. And I certainly wouldn't do that in court. But he was calm. Everyone saw it. It was something that for me, not the jury, we were coming back from a recess, gathering our exhibits, but it was something that I needed to do. Again, someone else might make the decision. I'm not going to address that. That was how I reacted. I think comments about maternity leave, again, very deeply personal how you react to those. I mean, some things that I've witnessed are, I'd say comments. For example, are you sure you can handle that? You're 7 months pregnant, for example. Or it seems like you've slowed down since you've come back from maternity leave. I've heard that a lot. I mean, to me, as offensive as it may be, remaining calm is important. And certainly let's start asking questions. If you're what do you mean by that? For example, are you unsatisfied with my performance? If you are, let's talk about it. But I'm deeply committed to the work that I do for this firm or for this organization. And I want to talk about why you made that comment. Again, being calm and professional, I think, is important. One more example I'll give.
Sure.
And again, I don't want to name names. I don't think that's productive. But I was in a phone conference with a client who's very, very senior to me, a colleague who's very, very senior to me, a lot of people on the call in and outside of my organization, someone who I would regard as a good guy, a good person, and absolutely shut me down in the middle of the conversation. "Kelley, stop talking."
Yikes.
Which for anyone who knows me is not an easy thing for me to do. I chose in the moment not to embarrass him, even though I was deeply embarrassed. And I thought that was very disrespectful. And I was also very angry. And I don't think, for me, having those conversations when you're very angry, for me, is not going to move the ball, is not going to help raise awareness. It's going to distract you from raising awareness, which is what a lot of these conversations are about. I had a private conversation with him later and said, for the sake of our working relationship, I need you to know that I felt very disrespected, and I thought it was very unprofessional what you what you did. Very apologetic, and I've seen, just from working with this person for several years, a shift just in other conversations for how he reacts in conversations and how he handles conversations and for managing interruptions. And I don't think he meant anything by it, which is sort of the last point I want to make. Mm-hmm. I think some things are objectively terrible. No matter who's looking at it, most people would agree that certain things are bad.
Right.
But I do think there's a tendency, and what I think people ought to avoid is jumping to conclusions when things are said to them or when they witness things. The example I gave earlier about the attorney from down south who was calling me honey, I don't think he meant anything by that. I think, we all have these different backgrounds and experiences, and even though it might not be something I can relate to, I think he didn't mean to do anything. So my point simply being, I think it's important not to jump to conclusions and to be calm and professional when you want to raise things, but don't assume that it's coming from a bad place, and try to reframe it and educate.
Okay.
And I really believe that.
Anne-Marie, you jump in.
A lot of the work that I do with clients, often I'm advising clients and high-level executive behind the scenes. And, there's this reluctance to bring a concern forward because of fear of retaliation. People are torn between, how do I preserve my self-respect, also advance the cause of women, and also protect my career, protect my advancement, protect my trajectory that I've worked so hard to get to. I always say, don't worry. We can do this in a way that is befitting your position, your role, and your career goals. And I think that's, I think that we, as upstanders, and we've learned that you have to stand up for yourself. And I think that people are sometimes laboring under the false impression that what that means is that you have to go to HR and say, I'm being discriminated against, and it's because of my sex. And there's a lot of ways that you can get that same message across, many of which have been illustrated by Kelley, that are just as effective and aren't putting you in that position where you are putting yourself at risk.
Right. It's just a lot of things. To Kelley's point, I always say I never blame a woman for how she reacts to a situation. And when you're, Anne-Marie, the things you have to juggle and think about in the moment, like my client, how's this going to affect my client? How's it going to affect me? It's a lot to think about. And if you can't do it in the moment, you can do it at a later time, something that befits the situation.
And again, you have to do it in a way that works for you. I mean, we could be facing the very same situation, and you might approach it differently.
Right. I had a situation where I was on a court call, and someone said something inappropriate, and I said, Counsel, you either refer to me as, Miss Brauer, or counselor, do not call me by that name. And people are like, I can't believe you thought to do that. And I said, I couldn't believe I had thought to do that either. But, I don't know. I just did it.
There's one other piece of advice that I wanted to share about a very common microaggression, and that is the being interrupted. And, I remember Judge Janet Burnside once said that the way that she handled that, and I saw it over and over again, is that she said, I'll finish my sentence, thank you, and just kept going. And I have used that throughout my career, and I love
like
that piece of advice.
Yes.
Because it's very direct, it's not rude, but it's basically just saying, I'll not be interrupted, and I'm going to continue.
I have another suggestion too, and I like
Yes,
that.
go ahead.
And I was assigned to her room for several months, so I can definitely recall times when she said that. Something that I've used a lot, and I report to a New York executive team, so interrupting's their thing. No offense to New Yorkers. But, I will often say, Bill, I want to hear what you have to say, but I'm going to finish my thought. So you're inviting them into the conversation, but you're saying, just hold on, and then you can talk.
I just add to, when we were talking before we started, Kelley, you made, I think, a good point, and we've kind of covered it, is that I think a lot of women feel guilty whenever we don't maybe say something, or we feel like we have to stand up for every single thing that happens. And you were talking about, kind of liberating us from that idea that it's okay if this isn't something that you want to address right now. That's also a valid choice. So having the tips for how to do it, I think, are so helpful, but also don't beat yourself up if this isn't a battle that you want to fight, especially because microaggressions are so prevalent. We're dealing with them every single day that we're interacting with folks. And so if you're feeling like something is, I just can't handle that today, or I can't address it, and then you walk away and you're starting to feel guilt, don't feel guilt. You don't have to address every single thing that's lobbed at you. And I think that's very, very good advice.
And I want to also move to, and Kelley sort of touched on this, like what allies can do when they see, a woman being interrupted or called an inappropriate name. Like in my situation, I would have liked the staff attorney to have said something to counsel, but he did not. So, and maybe that person had reasons of their own why they wouldn't do that. But what do you think about that?
Well, first let me say what's not helpful, in my opinion, is not doing or saying anything, but then coming to my office or calling me later and saying, "Are you okay? That wasn't right, what happened?" Now, some people might say, "I don't want somebody defending me. I can speak up for myself." But I've had it happen many occasions where someone's called me and said, "Are you okay?" And they literally said nothing. What I think would be helpful, and I'll use the example of interruptions, for example, and I've done this many times for men and women, by the way, is say, "Hey, Bill," and anyone named Bill,
Bill's a bad guy.
Don't get offended, okay? I'm just picking that, my stepdad's name is Bill, so it's just the first name that pops in my head. But hey, Bill or Susie, I think she's making a great point. I'd like to hear her finish it. And then let's hear your thoughts. I think there are ways you can do it without saying, "Stop interrupting her, stop interrupting him." I don't think that people are going to get defensive if they feel attacked, even if you're not attacking them, okay? And so I think there's a bit of psychology, to your point, involved in how you approach situations as an ally, as well as being the person who's the subject of, a moment. But not doing anything is okay. But I don't come to my office afterwards and offer me support. I mean, that's how that's my feeling. Again, that's how I feel about it when those things happen to me. And again, every ally has a different approach and a way of handling it. But I think when it's something that's objectively terrible, when I'm the ally in the room, I feel like I have a responsibility to say something in the moment, not later, not 10 minutes later, but right then and there.
Yeah.
Because that after conversation feels like, so you did see it,
Yeah.
right? And you elected to do nothing, and that's frustrating.
Yeah, and again, it depends on, it depends, right? But, and I also, it depends on how I know the people in the room.
Sure. Context.
If someone's an ally to something that's being said to me, they know, I'm good. I'm going to handle this. But again, if it's something objectively terrible, it's really hard for me to understand, not always, sometimes, why some people don't speak up. If it's a junior attorney or something in the room, I absolutely get it. But leaders in the room can't just sit there, in my opinion.
Okay. What do you think, Anne-Marie?
I think that sometimes it's easier to be an advocate on behalf of others
So it's
than
just
it is
thinking.
yourself.
Yep.
And so, I don't find this a difficult space to navigate.
Right.
I do think, to Kelley's point, that, and maybe it shouldn't be this way, but I think giving people the opportunity to save face, even if they perhaps don't deserve that opportunity, is important to move the needle and to affect change. Because if you downdress a person in the moment or in front of colleagues, or call them out in a way that's direct and embarrassing, that's not likely to improve behavior in the future. And a lot of times I think with some of these things, it's that people simply haven't considered it. And if you ask them to think about it differently, in a way that is collegial, in a way that is direct, but also advocating for what you know to be a behavior that should exist in the workplace, I think you're much more likely to have a good result. And you're not putting that person on whose behalf you're advocating in a difficult spot.
Yeah, that's a good point. All right, I want to shift now the conversation to family and caregiving. And I want to go back to you, Anne Marie, and talk about kind of your story about being a mother and joining your McCarthy Lebit and what that experience was like for
This
you.
is one of my favorite things to talk about, because I had my first baby at age 33 after having worked a lot of very long, very hard hours. I went back to work after 8 weeks, and my mentor, who was a wonderful trial lawyer and a great sponsor of mine, Ellen Simon, suddenly it was just her and I. And so I have this baby, and she said, "Don't worry, we're going to do this together." And then she had the opportunity to run for Congress in Arizona, and so it was really just me. And so my whole first year of practice, I was very conflicted between wanting to spend time with this baby that I had waited a really long time for, and the work that I knew needed to be done. And so at the end of her first year, I was so exhausted. I said, "I'm going to be a government lawyer. I don't want to do this anymore." And at the same time, we were in conversation with McCarthy Lebit about joining. And I had an offer from the Office for Civil Rights for the U.S. Department of Education at a significant pay cut, and an offer from McCarthy Lebit to come over as an associate. And I thought, well, now is the time to define the life that you want. Mm-hmm. And so I said, and they didn't know me at all. They weren't entering into this transaction to get Anne Marie Ahern. So I said, "Listen, I will only come if I can work 4 days a week." And the managing partner at the time, who's been a great sponsor and friend of mine, said, "Well, we've never had a part-time lawyer, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't, and so we'll give that a try." And so I did not work on Fridays. I mean, when we say did not work, we all know what that means. I didn't come into the office on Fridays. I still rarely come into the office on Fridays. I was able to be in the cafeteria every Friday for 6 years with my kids. I had that one day with them that was sacrosanct, that let me feel like I was doing a good job at being a mother and a good job at being a lawyer. And it meant so much for me to be able to design my schedule that way. My clients never knew, but I had that support. And, at some point, I was made a partner and then an equity partner on that schedule. At some point when I was still an associate, though, Ken Liffman, who gave me this opportunity, said, you get as much done in 4 days as everybody else does. So I don't know why we're paying you at 80%. And I said, that's a great point. And I would not have thought to ask for that myself, but he initiated that change in compensation and supported me all the way through as, a mother and a lawyer. And I think that and my youngest daughter wants to be a lawyer, and so that says to me that she doesn't feel like I've screwed her up too much. But it's that having that balance of being able to have success as a mother and success in my career is something that I will be eternally grateful for. And it started with making that ask for the 4-day work week.
Okay. And I want to kind of jump to about. And we got this comment or feedback from our last survey about single mothers and what they can do. I mean, I was not a single mother. I had my own law firm. I didn't have any, help at the law firm. I said, well, I need help somewhere. So I was fortunate enough that I could get a nanny to help with the child rearing, because it was just me, myself, and I at my firm. But for single moms who can't afford a nanny, who are trying to navigate their legal careers, and raise a child, I want to ask the whole panel kind of what your advice or tips would be for that single mother. I think one of which is, like Anne Marie, having a conversation about what you need, at your law firm. And actually, we'll start with you.
I think it's really important, as we're looking at women, to really remember that we are not a monolith. And so one working mother's objectives may be different than another's. One single mother's objectives may be different than another. We have a wonderful lawyer at our firm who was a single mother, and it was very important to her to have an unlimited ability to earn as much as she could as a single mother, and to control her financial situation, and to have a formula that incentivized her to do well. That was what was important to her at the time that she joined us. Another single mother may need flexibility in her schedule. She may need, the ability to come in after the child's on the bus. She may need the ability to maybe work a reduced work schedule. So I think that it's really important to, and this is something I feel very, very strongly about as it relates to child rearing responsibilities, to meet the lawyer where they are. Because when you look at the data of women who persist to the highest levels of management and partnership in law firms, we represent 50% of the law school graduates and less than 20% of the partnership. Mm-hmm. So what happens between graduation and those opportunities where you have your highest earning potential is that it's really hard to have little kids and to be a lawyer, especially in some areas of practice. And so how do we have open conversations about what can we do to help you as a female lawyer create the life, the schedule that you are able to manage so that you can get through to the other side and persist in the practice of law.
Okay. Kelley, what do you think?
I'm not a single mom, but I think for any parent or caregiver, right, it's important to set and communicate boundaries early and often. So, and I'll end this point in a minute about saying I don't do that very well, okay? But I just think, as tempting as it is, especially as a younger lawyer, or just a lawyer, because we're always, with all the devices these days, there's just no end to the communication. But it's as tempting as it may be, for example, to respond to emails as you're sitting down for dinner. Don't do it. If you start doing it, it's hard to unwind that expectation that, if I email Kelley at 8:00 at night, she's going to respond. So I think it's important to set boundaries early and often. If someone asks you to be on a call when you're normally with your child at an event, sports event, dinner, say, I'm not available at that time. I don't even think you need to say, it's my family time. I'm not available, but here's when I am available. Mm-hmm. I just think, again, finding the boundaries that are right for you and communicating those from the outset will help. Mm-hmm. Now, I am not a big believer in balance. For me,
okay.
It's striking the right level of imbalance that works for me and my family. Mm-hmm. And that shifts as you go through the different stages in your career. But you got to find what works for you, and you've got to communicate it from the beginning.
And that, we talked about when we were discussing before we became live, or we're live, about being comfortable to have uncomfortable conversations. So tell us what you mean by that.
Yeah, I mean, the types of conversations that we've been talking about today, if you choose to have them, they are never going to be comfortable. You might be used to having them, unfortunately, but no one's ever like, yeah, I get to say this, or I get to have this conversation. Right. So my point simply is, it's okay to be nervous. It's okay to be afraid. And it's normal to have those feelings, but try not to let that be the reason that you don't speak. To let that be the only reason that you don't act or speak up. And by the way, how you choose to act or speak up, and again, if you choose, it doesn't need to be some grand gesture. You don't have to give a speech or send an email blast. It can be a gesture that's consistent with your personality and how you would normally address situations. But don't not do it only because you're afraid.
Okay.
Think of, there might be other reasons you don't do it, but
Sure.
Don't let the discomfort of doing it be the only reason you don't have the conversation. Because then you'll never have it.
Right. All right. Looking at the time, I want to jump to next about talking about what firms and companies can do to retain women. Anne Marie had brought to our attention a survey from the ABA. It was from 2019. It's called Walking Out the Door, the facts, figures, and future of experienced women lawyers in private practice. I do want to give a shameless plug to the OWBA annual conference. The woman who wrote the foreword to this survey, Hillary Bass, is the former ABA president, will be our keynote speaker for our annual conference held May 8th through 9th in Columbus. All right, done with my plug. But what does that survey talk about in terms of what firms and companies can do to retain women?
You know, the data that it presents is very difficult to accept. You know, that 20%, and if you look at like the Crane's Book of Lists in Cleveland, you know, 20% of all partners in law firms in Cleveland and nationwide are female, and in Cleveland it's actually much worse than that. 20% was like the high water mark. Okay. And so, you know, the when I saw those figures reported, I thought, this is crazy, because law firms, for at least the last 20 years, have had women's committees. There has been an intentional effort to hire, recruit, train, retain women. Most law firms have been very mindful of the goal of diversity. And, you know, and nonetheless, the progress is not there. So I think that, you know, having a very strong mentorship program within your firm, having flexible work schedules, having a compensation system that is open and transparent. These are all things that that help move the needle. But really creating that community where women feel supported, where you don't ever feel alone. Where women are in leadership positions, and so there's representation, and young women lawyers see senior lawyers in the firm who have succeeded, who have succeeded financially and otherwise. Those are all things that will help keep women persisting in the practice of law, and to also understand that there is there's going to be, and I think that it has to be recognized that if you are a woman who has children, there is going to be a difficult period of your career where you are torn in so many directions every single day that it is difficult on the best day to do a good job at all of it, but that it gets easier. And I think just having women who have been down that path and can see the other side as someone who sees being an empty nester on the horizon, I think that it's really important for people to understand, like, you can do this and it's all going to be okay, and you are doing a better job than you think at all of it.
Okay. Bethany, we'll turn to you.
Yeah, I would just add, what I like about your point is that you're talking about what employers can do to a certain extent. And I think, conversations about, having space for women is so important. So we're able to talk about and think about these tips and best practices. And at the same time, we can't lose sight of the conversation that in order to do something differently, we have to do something different. Right? So systems have to change to some extent. And so you're talking about flexible work arrangements. You're talking about making sure that there's pay equity in the compensation scales. You're making sure that there's mentorship opportunities and promotion opportunities. And I think paying attention to the microaggressions that we're talking about today, this entire list of the things that women are still going through, all of those little choices add up to the inequalities that we're seeing at the partnership level, right? The reason women aren't making partner is not because they don't do great work. It's because they're seen differently, they're torn down through the process, they're blocked from opportunity. And so making sure that we are looking at the systems and making those adjustments is imperative, because we're not going to see change until we make a change.
Yeah. Kelley.
Totally agree.
Okay.
Now, let me start by saying I do think most firms and organizations are trying.
Yes.
Okay. I do believe they're trying. I was fortunate to work at a firm for 12 years that had flexible work arrangements long before COVID. That's just one example. I'm fortunate enough now to work at AmTrust, where I've been for the last 6 years, where they have several internal leadership programs that women participate in at multiple levels, and our executive committee is involved. Our executive committee and other leaders in the company, including me, are involved in formal mentoring programs that renew every year, and I think mentoring is so key. Obviously, family-friendly policies. I mean, that's a given to me. Those should be everywhere, and not just for all parents,
Right.
okay? But I think mentoring is key. I wish, I've had so many great mentors over my career, but I think being able to have conversations with other women in particular that have been successful is just, it normalizes what you're feeling. And I just think it's really important for those opportunities to be present at firms and for in-house counsel.
Yeah, and that's, I kind of want to wrap up then our conversation talking about mentoring, because that is one of the things in Bethany's survey that women want. And so I will, again, start with you, Kelley. What kind of advice would you give for either being a mentor or mentee, or how to navigate that relationship if you want such a relationship?
Yeah, so I think one misconception about the mentor-mentee relationship is that, it's on the mentor to do all the work. And it's a two-way street. And if anything, you as the mentee are the one doing the work. So, obviously you need to identify a mentor, someone that you admire, ideally in your profession, in your practice area. But I think once you have that mentoring relationship, you have got to figure out what you want from it. You've got to set clear goals and expectations. You've got to communicate those. You've got to show up.
Yes, I was just getting ready to say,
As
make it a
someone
priority and show up.
Yeah, someone who's been a mentor.
Yeah.
And I love mentoring. Okay, it's very life-giving to me, bucket filling for me. But nothing's more frustrating than, we're all busy. Okay, I jumped off a plane and rolled into my house at 9 o'clock last night, and I had a mentoring call at 8:15 this morning, doing this. And 5 minutes before the call, I got an email, sorry, I can't make it because I'm busy. Be respectful of the effort that your mentor is putting into it. Because most really good mentors take it seriously. And so it's a relationship that needs to be nurtured, but I think it's so important. Okay. And like I said, I've been blessed to have a lot of great mentors over my career.
Anne-Marie, what's your advice about that type of relationship?
I too have been blessed with critical mentors at every juncture of my career who have been instrumental to my success. But I would say that for me, each of those relationships was not a formal mentorship, right? And I think that remember, a mentor-mentee relationship doesn't have to have that label in order for it to be really effective. And I would like to think, to some degree, I've mentored, many of the lawyers and law students that I've interacted with over the years. But I think that, sometimes I would resist the label, because just being available to that person to support their career, to know that the door is always open, to serve as an example of, how to navigate a law firm environment or the legal system. Those are all ways that you can mentor informally that I think sometimes are a little more authentic than when you pair two people together and say, you shall mentor and you shall be mentored.
Yeah.
Can I build? I'd like to build on that.
Oh,
I think that's a great point. And I think, anyone listening, you can be a mentor right now just by paying attention. So when you see another woman lawyer, for example, if you observe that she's having a moment, or you know that she's having a moment, reach out to her. How you doing? Do you want to talk? And she might say no, and that's okay. But sometimes just that small gesture of reaching out or offering advice, or when she asks you to go to lunch, going to lunch, or when you say you're going to show up for her event, showing up for her event. Sometimes those small gestures can go a long way too.
Right. And I think with formal mentorship programs where you get kind of you're going to be the mentor, you're going to be mentee, I think those are fine, especially if people who are kind of maybe shy about that type of thing. But if it doesn't work, don't think, oh, this is never going to work. Don't be shy about going back, asking for a different mentor or mentee, and in addition to creating those relationships organically. Bethany, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, my best mentors have not been through a formal program. And I feel like when I started my career, you're told you need to find a mentor. And so I'm kind of walking around, are you my mentor?
Are you my mother?
Are you? And, you kind of learn that mentorship can be very small things and it can be more long-term relationships. And I've had so many different types of mentors over my career. And I also think a good mentor is also going to go to bat for you. You're going to speak your name in spaces that maybe you're not in. They're going to promote you as someone to look at. And so there have been so many great mentors, both men and women. So many women have been amazing mentors. I'm not sure I'd even be practicing in law if it wasn't for my partner, Claire Wade. I remember having lunch with her and saying, I always said I was never going to really practice law. I was doing this because I wanted to learn policy, but I think I might want to step into the space. And she just brought me in with every she just handed everything to me, and she always shows up and I ask the silliest questions. I'm like, am I supposed to be asked? I feel like I should know this. She repeats information. She's been an incredibly patient mentor with me. And so I think and we didn't meet through a program, right? We met out here in the community, and she's been an incredible support for me. So again, I think the label can be a little cumbersome, but you can find mentorship in so many different ways.
Yeah.
And also you have different mentors for different areas of your life.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? You could have someone more for the business side, or if you're experiencing these, macroaggressions, I'll use that term, another mentor that you feel more comfortable talking about those issues.
Absolutely.
Issues with. Kelley, were you going to say something?
No, I was just going to say, and it could be, I said earlier, ideally someone in your practice area, right? But I mean, when I think about, if you were to ask me, name a mentor, the first one that comes to mind, and this sounds cliche, is my mom. Not a lawyer. She was a court reporter, did not want me to go to law school. So that's exactly what I did. But the reason she's still a guidepost for me today is because she had a growth mindset, and she taught me that view roadblocks, which is what we've been discussing today, as opportunities, as challenges, and reframe. I mean, and I know we're running out of time here, but I was, 10 years old, on my elbows propped up watching some ice skater do like a triple pirouette, and I said, I'll never be able to do that. And she came and yanked me up and said, don't ever say that. You can do anything you want if you're willing to work hard enough and if you want it. And I think about that every day. Every morning I'm like, I have to deal with this today. How am I going to do it? And I just think about that. This is an opportunity.
Right. All right. We good on time? All right. I want to thank all our panelists for your discussion and your insights and sharing your experiences. I really appreciate it. And thank you, everyone, for attending today.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.
Great job.